Today we're going to be breaking down some one-on-ones from Colorado's spring practice. So this first route is going to be going up from Jimmy Horn Jr. So he's one of the most explosive wide receivers on the Colorado's receiving core, and he's going to be running this dig route using a stick at the top of the route and a slide release off the ball. So let's play this thing full speed, then we'll break it down. So because of the ball, he slides, gives a little crossover move, takes the inside release, puts the brakes on, and then is able to get out. That's a very explosive route. Now, the thing about this route is that it did take a little bit long. So on a dig route, you guys, there are multiple types of dig routes that you could run, right? So let's talk about just like a basic play called a dagger. A dagger is where you're running like a post dig and then the slot receiver's running a seam. It doesn't necessarily have to be a post dig. It could be just a regular one-cut dig, but that's where you're like a first read, right? So the quarterback's looking to you first. Then there are plays where you have like a dig route and then your slot receiver's running like a whip route. So you would be considered like a first or a second read. And then you have plays where maybe it's like a smash concept on one side of the field, you have a split route, and then you are a backside dig. So on the backside dig, you have a little bit more time with your route. So assuming that this is that backside dig timing, that would be fine in terms of the timing of this route. But if it's a front side dig, you got to be a little bit quicker with the moves that we decide to use. So on this slide release that he does here, the first step that he takes is with this front foot. So he takes this jab step to the inside. And the reason why he takes that jab step is to push off of it to get him into his slide. So a slide release is a great release to use because when you slide to the outside, it kind of makes this DB make a decision. When a DB lines up an inside shade press to begin with, his goal is to not let us go to the inside. So a lot of DBs are taught whenever you see a wide receiver slide to the outside, hold your leverage to the inside. Expect him to try to cut back in and run a slant or some type of inside breaking route. So this slide is great to use because we could slide to the outside, and if that DB sits and holds his leverage, I could just take off and go. Releases aren't super black and white or cut and dry. A lot of times it's a gray area. We are reading a DB and reacting off of a DB. Now, I think this may have been a little bit predetermined here, but I would have liked to see him just to make the route a little bit faster. If it was a first read dig, I would like to see him slide to the outside and this DB sitting inside. Just take the outside release. Take what he gives us, and we can work the stack over the top, or if that DB's right on my hip, we could work a throw-by move and slip underneath, and we're going to talk about that as this video progresses. But he slides to the outside, and maybe he felt that this DB jumped to the outside, but he throws this crossover fake to get him to bite, and now he takes the inside release on this dig. Now, anytime I'm against press coverage, my goal should always be to stack the DB, which essentially means we want this DB to be trailing our back hip. But if I'm not able to stack him, I still got to run my route at wherever the break is, whether that's 10 yards, 12 yards, 15 yards, whatever. So if he's right on my hip, I'm not going to break down and drop my hips. We want to use something called a stick at the top of the route. And the stick is just a single cut at the break point. It's not so much a speed cut. A speed cut in my terminology is more of like a rounded break. You could use that on a dig, or you could use it on like a 10-yard speed out. It's where you cut and you don't necessarily try to slow yourself down. You just maintain your speed, and there's a little bit of round on it. But a stick cut is where you're shooting that foot into the grass hard, and we are trying to make a sharp cut. So when we do this, and obviously Horn is very, very explosive when he cuts. This is something that not all wide receivers have yet. But when he does cut, I want you to pay attention to his foot strike. You see how the majority of his weight is on the ball of his foot. That keeps that cut inside of his body frame. A lot of wide receivers, when they cut, they over-exaggerate their cuts, and they're not on the ball of their foot. They will reach and land on their heel. And when you're running with this type of speed and your heel hits the ground first, your toes slap down, that puts a ton of pressure on my knee, and I can hyperextend, really hurt myself. So if we can focus on being sudden, shoot this foot into the grass, and stay on the ball of my foot to keep this foot inside my frame, I could have balance, I could push out of the break, and be able to separate from this DB. So that's a great example of a dig route using that single stick at the top and a slide release. Could this route have been faster? Absolutely. We're hoping that this is like a backside dig route timing. If it is a front side dig or a first or second read dig, we have to be faster with this slide release. We can't take so much time off the ball, okay? So now, let's get into this next example. So this is going to be an example of like a slot wide receiver running a seam route versus kind of a bigger linebacker sitting about 5 yards away, and I know this is a situation that a lot of you guys see. Now, before we get into this route, you guys, if you're a wide receiver and maybe you struggle on knowing how to work on some of the things that we discussed in this video, like a slide release, a stick at the top of the route, a crossover move, a throw-by move, whatever it is, check out that very first link in the description below for our Elite Wide Receiver Training Package. What you'll get access to is 8 weeks of daily on-field wide receiver route running drills, press release drills, catching drills, and 8 weeks of wide receiver gym workouts that you could do that will translate to on-field play. We map out everything with the exact sets and reps. We talk about video examples, or we show video examples of how each drill and exercise should be ran. So guys, if you want our elite wide receiver training package, check out that very first link in the description below. Again, very first link in that description below. Let's get back to this video. So guys, anytime that I have like a bigger, more physical dude, I'm maybe a slot receiver, not the biggest guy, and I have to run a route, where this could honestly be treated as like a corner route, an out route, a seam route, like he's running a post route. Most important thing is when he's giving me 5 yards of space, I got to close that space because I want to make him uncomfortable. I want to try to step onto his toes. However, if I am a short guy, I don't want to get too close, because if I get too close, I'm playing into his game and he's just going to get hands and reroute. What I want to do is I want to keep a concept called range. So I'm going to show this receiver doing a perfect example of just that. So he runs up, gets a quick little crossover move, takes this inside release, and then is able to win on that seam route over the top. So let's talk about this. So guys, a lot of times what receivers will hear me say is like, okay, you line up, DB's 5 yards away, we want to close the space, we want to get to his toes. And so what they'll do is they'll like literally get to the point where they are right in this DB's frame. He's able to get hands, he reroutes, and no matter what move I decide to use, I'm knocked out of the play. Because that linebacker, that safety, that nickel backer is bigger than me, stronger than me, more physical than me. So guys, you have to understand a concept called range. I think of it like boxing, right? In boxing, they call it reach, right? So before a fight, they'll show a guy's attributes. They show his height, his weight, and then his reach. And his reach is essentially like how long his arms are. You want to stay out of his reach. So in boxing, if a guy's got really long arms, you maybe don't want to like stay within his range, because that's how you could get clipped. Maybe you want to get inside of his reach, so maybe he doesn't have as much power on his punches. Or maybe you want to stay out of his reach if he's got shorter arms, so he has to come to you, and maybe you're a counter striker or something like that. Think of it like that in this type of situation, right? You run up to him, but I want to keep about a yard or two of space. So if he does want to get hands, he's got to lunge. He's got to leave his base. We're not running into his frame. And so if I want to take that inside release, this receiver uses a quick crossover. He shoots that foot in the grass, throws this cross to the outside, makes this DB jump to the outside, and then we're out. And we avoid the contact, you guys. If you are a shorter receiver, contact is not our game against bigger physical guys. Our game is speed, and our game is quickness. So this is a perfect example of that. So guys, you could do this if you had to run an outside release and run a corner, run an out route, run a fade route, or even if you're running like a quick seam, you could do the same type of concept. Just the crossover would be in a different direction. We close the space with them to make them uncomfortable, and we step in the direction we want to go first. So we want to go inside, so we step with my inside foot first, fake to the outside, it's a quick crossover, and then I'm up into this route. So let's play this thing full speed one more time. Again, this is a great example of this wide receiver running a seam route versus a bigger, more physical linebacker DB. So now, this next route here is going to be a hitch route versus an inside shade press coverage DB. So, guys, this is like kind of in this situation, remember we talked about that dig route where Jimmy Horn was running that route, right? Where it was like, okay, if he took an inside release, his goal was to stack. If I'm running a 5-yard hitch, I don't want to stack him, because if I got to drop my hips, he might run into me, nor will I have the time because it's a 5-yard break. So what we want to do on a hitch route when you have this type of look is we don't want to release inside, we want to release outside, and we want to attack this DB's outside shoulder and outside hip, and we want to make him think we are running what? We're running a fade. We are running a vertical for 5 yards. Then we want to try to get within 5 yards. We want to try to get that DB to do something called open up the gate, which means we want his hips and his shoulders to turn to the opposite end zone. And that's what this receiver does. He comes off the ball, gives this little slide, takes off full speed, gets that DB to flip, and then he uses a move called a throw by move. So let's talk about it. So this like little slide off the ball right here, this little like hesitation, all that does is that helps us self-fade a little bit more. What a lot of more like advanced wide receivers like to do, more creative wide receivers like to do, is they start off the ball like slow, like they almost go 0 and then they burst up to 100, because that like 0 slow pace and then you accelerating might make that DB think a little bit more that we're going vertical rather than just coming off the ball and running as hard as I can. Now, can they both work? Absolutely. But that's why you see a lot of wide receivers do this. They do this to slow down the DB's feet, and then they accelerate to get him to open up his hips. So he comes off the ball, he slides, and he pushes up vertical. Now, there are 3 elements that are going to get this DB to flip open his hips to the opposite end zone. Number 1 is going to be body language, because that's what a DB is ultimately looking at. He is going to be reading my hips. So if my hips and my shoulders and my head and my arms, everything about my upper body says that I'm running deep, that's going to make him think that we're running deep. Now, a lot of receivers, what they'll do on a hitch route is right before they decide to drop their hips, they'll start to turn their inside hip, turn their inside shoulder, turn their head because they're trying to find the ball. Guys, you have to keep your hips and your shoulders committed vertical until the last possible second. The hip drop is what's going to slow you down, but that's what sells this route ultimately, right? So now the second thing that's going to sell vertical is your speed. Guys, this DB ain't going to bite if we're running half speed. There's a lot of information out there. A lot of people will say like, oh, well, you want to have tempo to your routes. You never want to run full speed. Like in this situation, you need to run full speed. Are there times for it where maybe you could change the tempo? Yes. But in this situation, we got to have you run full speed. And then last but not least, it's about long strides. So if we come off and we have a good body language, good speed, and my strides don't shorten right before 5 yards, that DB has no choice but to think vertical. We want to make him open up. Then we put the brakes on. Now, we put the brakes on to get more separation. This is not a flag. This is not a push-off. This is a move called the throw-by move. So a throw-by move is where you put your hand on the back of the DB's arm, shoulder, or hip. Those are the 3 points of control. And if you could hit that point of control while selling vertical, while dropping your hips, the result is going to be this. That DB is going to fly by. We'll be able to slip back underneath, and we're able to win on that hitch route. And that's a move that you could use anytime that we take an outside release on an inside breaking route, like a hitch, like a deeper stop, like a dig, like a post, if I'm not able to do what? If I'm not able to stack over the top of them. So let's play this thing again, full speed one more time. This is a great example of using a throw-by move on a 5-yard hitch and being able to sell vertical.